what would you say are the fundamental principles of personal finance that like everyone needs to know, basically?
People want this big one-time sort of a lucky charm that they can become a millionaire. I am lucky that I have not won a lottery. So people say, oh, I want to be rich. That is not a goal.
Introducing Faisal Jiwani, Director of Equities at Anfal. With over 20 years in the equities market, he began as an analyst, moved to portfolio management, and now oversees international equities for Anfal. Faisal holds an MBA from IBA Karachi and has taught finance courses at universities in Karachi and Bahrain. He also conducts free webinars on investing the Warren Buffett way. An avid reader, inspired by legends like Buffett and Munger, Faisal enjoys finance, self-help, and biographies. He also is a Harry Potter fan, advocating its place in school curricula. Join us to explore the insights of Faisal Jiwani, a true equities connoisseur.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second podcast, AZAC Talk. And today we're going to be discussing a very interesting topic. I'm sure you're all worried about, your personal finances, how to invest, what to invest in, what books to read to help you invest. Well, today's podcast is all about successful saving. And I'm really excited because this is something I need to apply to myself as well. And today with us, we have a very, very interesting person. I call him the library of our organization, Faisal Jiwani. Faisal Jiwani is Director of Equities at Anfal Corp. He has been dealing with equities for over 20 years, starting off in brokerage house as part of an analyst and moving forward in his career. Welcome, Faisal.
Thank you, Anna.
Lovely to meet you. And obviously, we're really looking forward to what we're going to be discussing today.
So the first question I had in mind for you, can you share a bit about your journey in personal finance and what inspired you to help others manage their money better?
So it started off at a very young age. And so we had to move back to Pakistan from Kuwait when the war happened. So we didn't have much. So we valued everything a lot. And then once my dad got his graduate degree back in Kuwait, then he came back, he was very happy. And he said, dude, I'll put an allowance. I'll give you 5 rupees every day and then you can do whatever you want. But I won't give you anything else. So that, had some impact. And my sisters used to go also to bring things to perspective. That 5 rupees would get you a can of Coke and the chips. So you could go to school and have lunch. But what I did is I used to save those 5 rupees and I used to take a pair of bread with butter on. So that I did for about 5-6 years daily. So and I used to save that 5 rupees every day. By the end of the month, it was a hassle saving that 5 rupees every day. So we had a deal with the dad that, you give us 150 rupees on a monthly basis and we'll do whatever we want to. He agreed. So that's when I started thinking that what if I save this 150 rupees and how can I grow it? Then somebody told me you can get 10% interest in bank. So then I was thinking, okay, the money I get in January, if I keep it in the bank for a year, the next year I have 165 rupees. And I still get my 150 allowance, that makes it 315. Then if I keep that 315 for another year at 10%, I'll have 330 and 345, and the 150 allowance I'll have around 500. So in about 3 years, so this is my daydreaming going on, right? So in about 3 years' time, I'll have 500 rupees per month to spend. So a lesson to everybody here is that if you start thinking of your allowance as assets that can generate money, it would be so much better. So going on from there, then I started saving. And then another thing that my dad did is he didn't buy us things outright. So you had to work hard for it. So education was a big thing and we were quite poor. So he knew that if you want to get out of poverty, education is a must. So he used to give us, prize money, or if we came first, second, third in the class. He said, I'll buy you a cycle up to rupees 600. Right? If you come first, second or third. I came second. Now we went to buy a cycle. The cycle was 1,200. So I had to put another 600 for my own pocket. So, now that effort and my money, I took care of that cycle like anything. Now if you buy kids stuff, they just throw it around.
Trust me, I know, because I have like my little one, my 9-year-old, always trying to convince me to buy him more Roblox. And I've got all 3 of mine cards now. So they all have these cards and I give them regular pocket money. But it's hilarious because they always like spend that money. And I've told them, right, you need to like budget and make sure that you're using that for your canteen at school, as well as anything else you might want to buy. Like, they're into perfumes and, some of them are, my oldest one is going into teenagers now. So, but I do agree with you. I think it's important to teach kids from a young age, I think foundationally, how to budget and how to save,
Exactly. And in addition to that, you teach them how to budget, how to save, and make them put in effort. So I'll bring on a book here. So Robert Cialdini has a book called Influence. So, how you want to influence people, if they don't put in an effort towards something, they will not value it. So when you're raising kids, you have to make them put in an effort. If you just give it, I also guilty. I bought my son a cycle in 2 days' time. He's like, oh, I don't like it. Because there was no effort from his side. And so if you make them put an effort, they'll value it more. What happened next is that, once I started saving, I had all that cash when I didn't go to the bank, but I had all this cash. So I started thinking what I need to do with it next. So that's where the investment comes in. And it's a lot about the habit also. So again, there's another book called The Power of Habit. It breaks down what a habit is. Right? And if you develop these habits, it will become very easy for you to save money, to invest. So the second part of the question that you asked, and what motivated me to help others, when I started talking to people, I was quite young and I had saved quite a lot of money because that was a habit I didn't spend. I was a miser, right? Thankfully so. But when I talked to people, it seemed that whatever they earned, they just spent. They didn't have anything left. And I used to teach them unknowingly, if you have a separate bank account, you just put aside a little bit of money and that will grow on its own and you should make it a habit. That's when I realized that a lot of people need to know. A lot more people need to know about this. They don't do it.
That's an interesting subject because I've had people that said this to me because I'm always talking about, I need to save, right? But I have people that tell me, like very successful entrepreneurs that will say, but you don't think like a worker's mindset if you're just saving, diversify, invest in lots of different things. Would you agree with that?
Yes, that's the second step. The first step is you need the money to put into these ventures, right? Yeah. So there's a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad. I would recommend you to read it. I would recommend you to make your kids read it as well. If they're more than, they're older than 11, 12 years old, make them read it. It basically gives you a mindset on how to treat money. So what you're talking about is totally right. You need to think as an entrepreneur, but you need some money to be an entrepreneur, right? So where is that money going to come from? So we are the working class, we'll save something and then we can become the entrepreneur. So you need to make your money work for you.
So in terms of, that brings me on to my next question. What would you say are the fundamental principles of personal finance that like everyone needs to know basically?
So there are 3 things that people get wrong and they need to understand. It's all about habit. So you develop a habit slow and steady, then you grow it. And it's more about the habit of saving and investing than anything else. People want this big one-time sort of a lucky charm that they can become a millionaire. So there was a study that a lot of people who actually win the lottery, eventually they're not happy in life because they spend it all. They don't know how to manage the money, right? So you want that. I am lucky that I have not won a lottery. Thank God. I've saved a little bit a long time and so now I know how to value that money. Right? So one thing people need to know is to be habitual about the savings and taking out money and investing. Second is that the return on investment is not that important if you are saving a lot throughout a lifetime, right? So a 2% return on $1 million is $20,000. But 100% return on 10,000 is also like another 10,000, so you become 20,000. So you don't go for that 100% return, go for that 2% return. Becomes so big that even a small safe return is enough. Right? So you need to go there. So people are in for that lucky thing to happen, but that's not very common.
So true. So in terms of mistakes, okay, I know I've made plenty of them when it comes to personal finance. And obviously we learn from these things. But What are the most common mistakes people make when managing finances? And what would you suggest? How can we avoid that?
Again, people will make mistakes. Everybody does make mistakes. But the main thing is start early, do it regularly, save early, then invest in many things. So if you're making mistakes, if you're diversified enough, then one mistake will be covered by a good thing as well, right? So how can you diversify? The easiest way is you make a plan. Think of how much you can save every month. Now, many people say, oh, I don't know how much I can save. I don't know what my expenses are, right? You just go on a spending spree and you don't know where the money has gone. So I don't blame you for that. What you can do is as soon as the salary comes, you take out a part and put it in another account. It could be more, it could be less. You don't know how much you spend, so you don't know how much you can save. But within 3 to 4 months, you'll figure out that how much pain you're feeling towards the end of the month. If the end of the month, the bank account is empty, you're feeling a lot of pain, you want to go out, you want to spend on entertainment. Okay, so next time you put a little less amount. But if you're very comfortable, you passing a month, oh, I can save more, right? And then maybe you can start keeping track. So there's a very easy way to do it. You might have to, naturally, you'll have to put in effort. Make an Excel files and a lot of apps. Record your dates and what you're spending on and the money that you spent on. So when I started my job, I used to have an Excel file with every daily expense that I did. Right? You put in the date, I ate biryani, I wrote biryani, 2 dinners. And then at the end of the month, you just sit down and just see what you've done. You categorize them, that what have you spent on eating out, you've gone to the cinemas a lot, you spend on purses a lot. Then there are expenses that you cannot avoid. We need the help. Now we are at the stage we need to, provide for the family. Yes. So schooling is very expensive. And then you have hospital bills. You need to take your kids to the hospital. You have to take your parents to the hospital. Right? But then there are expenses which are avoidable. You've been to the movies 10 times in a month, that's too much. Right? You bought a Louis Vuitton bag for 1,200 BD. Maybe next time you can avoid that, right? So, but the thing is, you even don't need to do that if you just save at the beginning of the month. Or whatever is left, then you spend it.
Yeah, my only thing with that is I know I'm not, obviously, naturally, I'm more of a creative person. I'm less of a sort of spreadsheet person, okay? And I know there's plenty of people like that are less, let's put everything on Excel. So what else can you suggest they do,
So the other thing is that initially, whenever you get the salary, you put an amount aside. Then you don't need to worry about those Excel sheets and stuff. I used to love those Excel sheets, so that's why I did it. Yeah. I know many people don't. Yeah. So for that, you put it in another account, make a new account, don't get the ATM. Yes. So it will make it difficult for you to go and get the money out. So when you really need it, that's when you will take it out. And I would recommend once you start doing this about 5 months, 10 months later, you'll have so much in that account that you start thinking, what do I do with this money? Yeah. Now you are stepping towards the investments. Then you say, oh, now where do I put this money? Shall I buy stocks? Shall I buy real estate? Right? So that's a stepping forward. And then if you have a business idea, as you said, you're creative, you can use that money in a business.
Exactly. Amazing. So in terms of, you mentioned, a few books earlier in our conversation. What 3 top books do you sort of recommend in terms of, for us to sort of learn more about personal finance and support us in our investments?
The first one, I think, Rich Dad Poor Dad is a very good beginner's book. Actually, then he has, Robert Kiyosaki has a couple of other books also which are not that famous. But to begin with, Rich Dad Poor Dad is very good. There's another book called I Will Teach You to Get Rich by Ramit Sethi. And he also talks a lot about how to, put down your expenses, track your expenses. And he has mentioned a lot of apps also. So if you don't want Excel nowadays, there are apps which can track your expenses. But most of them are saying that, you save and you become rich. The third one is Psychology of Money. He also says that, he and his wife have found stuff that they like to do, which doesn't cost money. So they visit libraries, they have book clubs, they go to cinemas once in a while. So they don't have these expensive, things that they want to do. So they have, they've saved up $1 million and now even a 2-3% return on it, they can survive easily. right? So that is one book. Algebra of Wealth was a good book. He talks about real estate investing, stock investing. Then easiest way of going into stocks is ETFs. So you buy the index. You don't need to pick stocks. You don't know much about.
Yeah.
You buy the whole index. You like S&P 500 has given you 10 to 12% per annum. So in the long term, making 8 to 12% is not that big of a deal. But the thing is, the days should be there, right? As I mentioned, if you get to that $1 million mark, 10% return is $100,000. It's enough for you to spend around the year, right?
Yeah. So in terms of influential reading, out of all those books that you've read, and I know you read so many, because every time I have conversations with you, you're like, Anisha, read this book, read that book, and I was just like, wow, you really are like a library of knowledge. Out of those, which ones would you say have influenced you the most, Stephen?
So I started off with this book called The Secret. It's not a personal
finance.
Yes. It's not a personal finance book, but it basically makes you think, what do you want in life? Exactly. So once you know what you want, you will work towards it. Automatically, you keep thinking about what you want, and then automatically you will work towards it. So that is not a personal finance book, but it's a really good book to get you started. Other than that, my favorite book is called Buffettology. It is, if you want to go into stocks and you want an easy way out, Buffettology is amazing. It tells you about what industries will, be the least riskiest industries for you to invest. They'll keep growing. They'll keep giving you money. Amazing. And then there's another stock book which is 100 Baggers. So have you heard about the term 5 baggers, 10 baggers? So Peter Lynch is an investor. He used to work in Fidelity, and he has returns of about 29% per annum. Right. He termed the coin called 5 bagger, which means a stock that goes up 5 times. Right. So if you talk to people and I think like, whoa, which stock goes up 5 times? People just make 20% and get out. So then he used to have a lot of these stocks which have gone up 5 times. So when this book came out, the book's name is 100 Baggers. I was like, 100 baggers? That's not possible. Right? So they give you that, in the last 30 years, there have been about 360 stocks that have gone up 100 times. Wow. Exactly. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Right? And then he talks about what stocks went up, what were the characteristics. So, okay, so these stocks have gone up. So now how can you benefit out of it? So he talks about the characteristics, and these characteristics, exactly. And so companies that grow their earnings, they have a high return on equity. They are providing a service that nobody else is providing. The owner is a big part of the shareholding pattern. So like Jeff Bezos has so much of his own company, right? So he's working for himself. So stuff like that. So if you look at that characteristics, you might find new companies that have the same characteristics, and then they can become 100 back.
So that brings me on to my next question of, because you talked a lot about you touched upon investment and strategies. What would you say are the most effective investment strategies that beginners like myself can start off with?
So initially, I would say plan how much money you can save up in the next 10 years, and then diversify into different buckets. So you should have some cash position. Naturally, there might be unavoidable circumstances that you need the cash for. Around 20% of your net worth should be cash. You can keep that in fixed deposits, 3 months deposit, 5 month deposits. The rates are okay now. 2 years ago, there was 0. Now they're 3 to 5%, 6%. So a little bit is there. And then you go into different pockets. So you have a real estate pocket. Maybe you need a lot of money to buy an apartment. So you can move that to a secondary part. You can start with indices. Another 20 to 30% could go into indices. Then you have real estate investments. Another 20 to 30% can go into real estate. And then there are bonds. So government bonds are available. You can invest in that. Corporate bonds are slightly on the riskier side, but you can invest in that also. So these 4 buckets should be filled in. And every time you get a paycheck or a big amount, you think about where to put it, or you can divide it.
So, like, for example, I have an uncle who basically, that's what he does. He's very, very good at it, investments. And, he said, Anisha, just put it in the Index 500 USP fund, just that's it. They'll be fine, So you don't have to worry about where you're putting it, especially myself not being an expert in finance. But, so he said it's easier if you just do that. Now, is that something you recommend everyone does?
Yes, totally. So that 20% that I'm talking about is put in stocks. You can put in ETFs or indices, right? So you don't have to do all the work. You have the best 500 companies in US that you invested in. Now, if a company goes bad, they will automatically take it out of the index. So they are doing all the work for you. You are paying a minimal fee. So fund managers are charging you 1 to 2%. These ETFs will charge you 0.5% or even lower, right? So this is very good advice. So that stocks or equities portion can be invested in the S&P, but you need to have all the other.
Well, I have to say one thing, and you'll be quite surprised. Although I count myself as a beginner, I do have an investment account online, and I do have, so I've started doing that. I started listening to that advice. So in terms of books specifically focused on personal investments and building portfolios, you just spoke about the different pots. What books are interesting to read that would give me that knowledge?
Recently I finished this Algebra of Wealth. That talks about all these baskets. And as you grow old, all these baskets will have a decent amount, and then how to calculate. So again, common sense, is required in most of the things. So let's say you're buying real estate. Yeah. What do you look at when you're buying the real estate property?
If I was to, buy real estate, I would probably look at, it depends, right? If I'm investing in, let's say, a commercial property, I'd look at, the rental value in that commercial property. If I was investing in a house for myself, then I would look at somewhere I'd probably want to live for the rest of my life, and somewhere that it's going to grow with time, so that when I'm not here, my children can basically capitalize on that.
Yeah.
If I was to buy an investment property to rent out, then I'd look at the yield I'd get from that.
So the apartment or the house that you're buying for yourself, by the way, Forbes doesn't count that in your wealth. Yeah. Right? So this is something you're using. Okay. Yeah. But the commercial property that you said you are going to rent out, you're looking for the yield, right? So that is the most commonsensical thing that you can do. You look at the rent, you look at the price, and you divide it, you get the rental yield. So this is the same thing that you do in stocks as well. And you can do this in everything, right? So if you're buying the stock, people are like, is this a good stock? Is this a bad stock? Like, what are the earnings? And in terms of your apartment, the analogy is good because everybody understands that. If you have bought it in one neighborhood, you can increase the rent as well, right? So in terms of stocks, can the company increase the earning? Right? This is what you're getting out of the company, right?
Another good comparison is, because I have friends who do this, and they buy properties and then they do them up. They buy like rundown properties, do them up, and then sell them on. So is that something that can be applied to stocks as well?
That can also be done. That's called activism. But then you need to buy a major part of the company so that they listen to you. Right. If you want something to be changed in the company, you need to have that influence over them. And that will only come with 30-40% of the share of the company. Right? So you can do that. That's called activism. The point that you made about holding it and then the price goes up, that's called value investing. So basically you look at the earning yield. And if it's very high, you think, oh, this is a very cheap stock. So you buy it, you hold it, and when it goes up, you can sell it. The other thing is, so that is Benjamin Graham. Now that you brought it up, I can talk about value investing. Value investing is Benjamin Graham. And he basically says you buy cheap stocks, very, very cheap stocks, and then you sell them when they go up, and then you buy some other cheap stocks. On the other hand, there is Philip Fisher, who talks about growth stocks. He wants to buy companies that keep growing the earnings. Let's say Pepsi, Coke, Colgate, they have been increasing the prices ever since like last 50, 60 years, right? If you see their earnings keep growing. But the thing is, you will not get them cheap. If you get an industrial company at 8 times P, which is a 12% yield, you will not get Colgate at that price. You will get Colgate at 20 times P, which is a 5% earning yield. But you hold on to that company will keep growing their earnings and will give you a return. So basically, Warren Buffett, I'm a big fan of him, he says, I want companies at Benjamin Graham prices, but I want Philip Fisher companies. Mm-hmm. So when the markets crash and nobody has the guts to invest, then the markets crash because you're like, oh my God, what happened? Mm-hmm. Do buy companies that grow, but at a good value.
In terms of like books, like, how important is it for us all to stay, updated like regularly? Because obviously the world is changing. We have to adapt to that change, right? We have to be agile. So how would you suggest like we regularly read and, are books changing? Is the advice changing,
So I would say no. So people follow news a lot, which they do to a level that makes them stressed out. I won't recommend that. You should look at the news, but things don't change that fast. If you read a lot about, our ancestors and our prehistoric people, they were all the same. We've been living very long lives, and we are a very small percentage of the, age of the earth. But things have not changed a lot in terms of what we think. So I would recommend read a lot of books on how the brain works, how historic people live. There's a book called Sapiens, that's amazing book. He talks about how our ancestors lived, what they did, and how they thought. And if you think, we also think the same way. So there's another book called Same as Ever. I haven't read it, but it talks about it's always the same. So I'd recommend read about books to understand. So there's a person, called Naval Ravikant. In his book, there's a book called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant. He says you gain knowledge about 5-6 basic things. That includes your maths, science, persuasion, history, and arts, right? So it's a very diversified sort of thing. When you start understanding psychology, when you start understanding numbers, you start understanding physics, a little bit of science, right? You can then mash them up and have your own sort of a thing that now you understand things, the whole thing, but in bits and pieces. Right? So I would recommend reading books. Newspapers is fine, you need to be updated, but not to the level that gets you stressed out. My dad reads newspapers and he comes up with small news that, don't change anything.
Yeah. So but I 100% agree with you in that term. So there's a funny story I have. So when I was going for my interview for my sixth form to do my A-levels, and they looked at me and said, I said, I love the sciences. I love all my sciences, but I also love drawing and painting and the arts, and I love history as well. I love drama. I love acting. And they were like, Anisha, we recommend you do 4, but you can't do the arts subjects and the science subjects together. And that was one thing that really crazed me, because I was like, I love both. I actually love both. I gain knowledge in different ways from both. So I guess that 100% applies to personal finance.
What we find very interesting is Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo. These guys were very good in maths and poetry. That has no connection. So you have to be multidisciplinary. That's what Charlie Munger talks about. You need to read a lot about different subjects to make a wholesome view of the world. There's a word for it called the Lollapalooza effect.
So what final piece of advice would you give to someone looking to take control of their personal finances?
So the first thing I would say is think about what you want, make a plan, and then start executing that plan, and set up a goal. So there's a very good, all these motivational speakers, they come to you and they ask you, what is a goal? So people say, I want to be rich. That is not a goal. You need to have an amount in mind, and you need to have a timeline. So you need to say, I need to save up or have $1 million by the end of 2027. Now you can work backwards and say, I need to save this much. If that is too much for you, then you can lower the amount. But at least have a goal, proper goal with a timeline, and then start saving up, and then make it a habit. Make it as easy as possible for yourself to do it. You can make a standing instruction in your bank to transfer money to another account. You can have a standing instruction to buy S&P index. Every month, on the 15th of every month, you buy the S&P index worth $500. So this is automatic saving, automatic investing. 3-4 years later, you'll say, wow, what a good thing I did, right? Without any effort. And then you can continue doing your arts and your math and your painting, whatever you want to.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Faisal. It was a pleasure having you with us today.
Yeah.
I'm sure you all enjoyed listening as to what Faisal had to say. The advice he gave us was amazing. And we look forward to hearing more from you, maybe in another podcast very soon, hopefully.
Sure. I look forward to it as well.
So thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next AZAC Talks podcast. See you. Bye-bye.